Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic, and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. I confess I always cringe a little bit when I hear someone use the phrase twin flame or soulmate in order to describe a romantic relationship. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One of them is that it's a big part of my job and pleasure and joy to find English, to put into words experiential phenomenon that relate to the energetic or the unseen realm. And so when I talk to my guides, they communicate in vibration, in images, in transmissions into my brain. I have a 20-year relationship with them doing professional shamanic practice, and so we have a lot of shorthand and ways to communicate very quickly what all they want to say. And yet, it's always an interesting thing to take something that is so crystal clear in shamanic reality and put words to it that are comprehensible to my client, or that I could share with a friend when I'm trying to share something that matters to me. And so one of my gripes with the language twin flame or soulmate is a profound lack of precision. So there's so many different ways that we can have soul relationships with other humans that very much exceed the scope of what we've experienced together in this lifetime. Sometimes there's past soul history, other lifetimes that we've lived together. Sometimes we come from the same place in the universe before we became a soul that started incarnating here. Sometimes we carry similar archetypes or vibrational structures. And one of my favorite things to share with people is what I have coined soul note harmony. And what I mean by that is that the light or the vibration or the essence of one person's soul creates a harmony, so a unique new energetic experience when it comes into proximity of another person. And so I like the analogy, I use the word harmony for the analogy's sake, of playing on a piano and having different notes that harmonize and certain notes that clash. And one of the things that I did in my 20s was singing in a Celtic folk band, and with lots of hard work, I achieved solid mediocrity. My ear for sound and harmony and notes just doesn't tend to have the nuance of anybody who ever under other circumstances would stand up and sing in front of other people. So the band helped me out a lot, trying to keep me on my part. And yet when tight vocal harmony happens, I think it's one of the most beautiful sounds on the planet. And when somebody's off a note, they're out of that alignment, there's a really unpleasant experience of being out of tune and having these notes that clash. And when it comes to other people, sometimes there's just a dissonance, a lack of alignment in the soul note harmony, which means however lovely a person they are, you're probably not going to enjoy spending that much time with them unless you have a capacity to kind of adjust your own vibration to match. Like one of the things that I'm really good at is creating rapport, so I can kind of adjust my energetics to match someone else's temporarily. But sometimes that messes me up in one-on-one relationships, because in my charm and delight about what a cool person they are, or how bright their mind is, or how neat something about them is, especially if they're sexual attractions, sometimes I can adjust to match them energetically and create a harmony. But then when I get tired and at the end of the day, suddenly we come together and find ourselves in dissonance because I don't have the energy to adapt my vibration to match. And that's just one of the sort of unique things that I needed to learn along the way of this journey of managing and working with the energetic aspect of my being. So coming back to these two terms, soulmate and twin flame, one of my gripes with them is they end up being umbrella terms that describe all these different configurations: soul note harmony, profound alignment between the crown chakra, just a really, really neat engagement at that level, past life history, similar soul history in the universe, similar archetypes. There's so very many ways that something amazing and special and vibrant can happen with another human between the two of us, and an energy that is unique and magical to the connection can be created. And likewise, there's a whole complicated energetic component where sometimes there's conflict and tension and dissidence when people are reasonably skillful at relating to other humans, and yet there's something that they just have trouble with. And being able to understand and isolate and make sense of the energetics between you and another person is an incredibly useful skill if you're someone who's sensitive to energy and feel a lot of things. But what annoys me about these two terms is they end up being this huge, broad catch-all. And people know that they're this huge, broad catch-all. And so one of my pet peeves with different practitioners is when they go in and offer an authoritative definition for soulmate or twin flame. And one of my clients will come to me and say, according to so-and-so, a twin flame is blah, 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 and a soulmate is blah, 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 blah. And there are all these different definitions. And so I get that there's a usefulness in specifically defining a term if you're going to use it, but there isn't really a consensus. If you sat down a bunch of metaphysical, psychic type people who are able to accurately perceive energetic relating between humans, they would define terms in a lot of really different ways. So it isn't sort of a universal, standard, agreed upon kind of language, which makes it extra confusing because it gives people the idea that they've classified something with a term that really provides no information, and then often they stop being curious about it. They sort of take it as a given, and they lose their, there's this thing, there's this energy that lights up, there's this experience that happens that's unique to my connection to this person. Interesting, I wonder what it means. Instead, they're putting it into this category. And it usually gets paired with romantic relationships, which can be super confusing. Different chakras feel different ways about romantic relationships. So our root chakra and our instinct areas are looking for safety and procreation to come out of the experience. Our third chakras are trying to have worldviews that don't clash. Our heart chakras are about love, connect, love, connect. Our throat chakras want to be able to communicate. Our third eyes want to be able to see a vision with the person. And then the whole realm of how do you connect as souls happens in the area of the crown chakra. And one of the cool pieces of wisdom about evaluating a relationship that I get from one of my Tantra teachers, Sean Roop, is if you have 3 out of the 7 chakras that harmonize, that get along, that's the path of suffering. But if you have 4 out of the 7 that naturally, authentically line up, not these false positives where you're able to adjust your energy to make it match someone else's chakra, but in its normal, resting, unaltered state, gets along well, you really have something that you could work with. There's possibility there. Which brings me to my second reason that I often sort of have a difficulty and cringe a little on the inside when I hear usually a woman come to me and tell me that the man or woman that they're involved with is their soulmate or their twin flame, is that at the point that I'm hearing that language from a client or a potential client, it's usually being used to argue with reality that something isn't going so smooth sailing in the relationship. There's some problems, there's some conflicts, there's some difficulties, and the part of them that is arguing and justifying staying in the dynamic across some major problems is treating the subprint under soulmate or twin flame as meant to be. And therefore, if they can just figure out what's gone wrong or heal their partner's past wounds or whatever else, it's totally going to work out. And I think this is a really honest mistake the first time you run across it. I know I certainly got really spun out the first time I met some romantic partners. There were two that showed up at the same time. That was super confusing, with whom I had a profound soul connection, and in this lifetime, a mutual romantic interest. And all of the intensity I was feeling on the soul level that I hadn't shared with another person ever before, and yet some massive mismatches at the human level made it really confusing. And if not for the profound soul connection that was like nothing I'd ever felt, I would have just walked away. I would have been like, I don't love how you're treating me. You're really unclear. Communication gets wonky. I'm not having fun over here. Thanks for playing. I'm gonna remove myself. But instead, I really doubled down and worked really, really hard to try to find a way with each of these relationships to make them come right. And in the end, I walked away a sadder but wiser girl, as the song says, able to understand that a profound soul connection is just one element, and almost there's a need to hold your hand up over the light of that, as it were, somehow block it out and disregard it, so you can really pragmatically look at the human alignment. One person described it as soulmate but not life partner. And that's powerful knowledge to have, but the first time that you run into this amazing, vibrant, alive experience with another person, it can be pretty confusing. And Hollywood rom-com mythology would tell us that if there's a sufficient emotional intensity and love and affinity for someone, that ridiculous, improbable obstacles can totally be overcome. It's a really romantic story. And we don't get trained in the energetic and unseen aspects. So a lot of us are having the experience and then looking for context that we can make sense of subsequently. And frankly, a lot of what you can Google is bad information. It's just wrong, in my opinion. It's people who are making up a mythology or a story or a teaching story about what they've experienced in order to have context for their own experience, which is totally fine. But then they post it on the internet, and other people who are having the same experience are like, oh, here's a human who's having an experience like I am. Let me see what they have to say about it. And, that's totally valid, except that then people take as factual information in the same way as if you Googled a health symptom on a reliable website that, oh, it's on the internet, it must be true. And then, unfortunately, people then begin constructing a context around something that leads, in my opinion, to a lot more pain and struggle and duration. Because when someone uses the language of twin flame or soulmate to justify staying in a dynamic that is unhealthy, that is perhaps abusive, maybe the person is an addict, maybe you really need monogamy and they are not down for monogamy, maybe they're just so full with their own life that they don't have the ability to really share the time and engagement that would work really well for you. There are lots and lots of things that should be deal breakers, not necessarily even because the other person is a bad person, but because truly you could never feel happy and satisfied with the experience as it is. There's sort of a radical notion that someone I know proposed, which was to say our boundaries aren't up to us. And I think that our story about our boundaries can be up to us, but at the most core level, they're just things that do and don't work for us in relationship. And if we're trying to live with something that doesn't work, it takes a ton of energy. And so it's draining the emotional bank account. And if there's enough good stuff that's positive, then yeah, you can work with it. You can still create sustainability or an upward spiral. But at the point that I'm talking to people, usually they're in a lot of suffering, in pain, in confusion, don't understand that having found this rare and elusive soulmate or twin flame individual, why on earth that it's not coming right. And they would like to either get over it so they're not so magnetized to this person that is causing a lot of difficulty. They have a really, really, really hard time sort of breaking the gravitational field of their intensity of connection to that person and actually authentically stepping away, not only in the physical, but in their mind and being free of it. They still daydream and think about and check Facebook pages or whatever, and or they want it to come right. They want it to eventually circle around and work out for them. And those terms are often used to kind of, not deliberately, but it can be a lie about reality. It can be a way of warping reality with concepts. And one of the challenging things about humans is the mind can justify anything. And when the want is really high, we're very good at rationalizing things that, from a sober perspective, without a vested interest, sound cuckoo, but sometimes I feel like people who are participating in questionable life choices that could have some consequences sort of almost all get together and agree on the most plausible sounding things. So the addicts of, the person who's really, really addicted to alcohol, who's trying to get sober, has a certain number of go-to rationalizing the excessive drinking on this particular day and why that would be perfectly okay. Or the man who has decided to go forth and cheat on his wife has the list of rationalizations, and you could listen to these people and they'll tell you like the same story. There's sort of these core ideas, and there's sort of a uniqueness to people participating in relationships that are not going well, that they're really attached to, and part of that attachment and intensity and unwillingness to step away is because of the intensity of the energetic aspect, the way that their soul has a different energetic experience with this human than what they've ever felt with any other human. And I think that one of the really common interpretations of coming across someone and having that instant psychic rapport, what the other person's thinking, when they're going to call, you have an awareness of what's happening in their day. If you've experienced that for the first time, it's pretty magical. And again, it gets made into meaning if there's a romantic dynamic. So I absolutely have those experiences with a number of my platonic friends, but I just don't make a big fuss about it. But suddenly it takes on this significance if it's a new romantic relationship. And new romantic relationships are hard. You're in the, I don't know, this could be amazing or this could fall apart, and I'm still learning, and I really have no way of knowing where it's going to go. And humans like to have the ground under them of having a feel for it. And leaving out the metaphysics and the energetics, a lot of the same parts of our brain that light up if you took cocaine light up with high levels of romantic and sexual attraction. We really do get high on the chemistry of that. It's a very intensive rush, and there are lots of people who are not particularly energetically sensitive, who are not particularly engaged at the soul level, who are deeply, deeply addicted to that rush. And there's, this revolving door that's happening in their life where they are caught up. That experience of relating is their drug of choice. And I don't say that in a judgy way. I think it's really good as an individual to identify your drugs of choice, like the go-tos when you're feeling something you don't want to be feeling, because most of us have one or another, and ideally we have it wrangled to the point that it doesn't spin out and crash other parts of our lives. But we tend to think of addicts as the people where it's a little more extreme. But I think there's a lot of use in finding the part of you that can justify anything and the part of you that has a given drug of choice, whether it's sugar or romantic relationships or alcohol or extreme sports. And it doesn't mean that you can't have those things in your life. It just means question what you're telling yourself about those things, because you may not be creating a path that's balanced. You may spend money you don't have. You may have things that affect your ability to be present in other relationships, in your work, in your health, all of those kind of things. And many of the people who are in the confusion of that dynamic, that feeling of, I don't know what this is, I don't understand, I'm feeling all of these things, there's so much intensity, I've never felt anything like it, we're connected on a soul level, I don't know how to navigate it, are using those search terms in a very genuine, authentic desire to make sense of what they're experiencing. And I would say that lots and lots of energetically sensitive people experience this, and because we don't get trained in the energetic aspects of human relating, how we cord into each other, how our energy bodies touch each other, how we can interact with each other, there's a lot of mystery and confusion and complexity, and people end up often having to solve this complicated thing of, this person isn't a really good match for me at a human level, but oh my goodness, there's such a profound connection, and I really treasure that. And one of the challenges that I really had to work with in my own life was just how much value and weight I put on that elusive, magical dynamic of when there was a soul affinity, when there was a energetic connection and appreciation. And that's the part where when I meet someone and I feel that, I'm like, oh wow, there's something here. And then I really do my best to put it aside to answer the question of, how do we work as human beings? Because when you have that soul affinity or that past life history or a soul note harmony or any of these other things, you are at risk for compromising and putting up with things you would never put up with someone else. And I wish that an activation at a soul level or energetic sensitivity or psychic ability made innately more noble people with fewer issues. But sometimes it actually goes the other way. My social skills were way below par as a child because it was just so dang loud. I certainly wasn't less judgy or more evolved because I was feeling things from the unseen world. And that's a whole nother thing. You find someone who's a really clear channel occasionally when they're not emotionally involved, and consider them to be an evolved person, and actually they've got a whole bunch of the human issues. It's why I'm such an advocate of shadow work being combined with any kind of metaphysical training, so you know how to question what your mind is telling you and be objective about the information that's coming in. Because when we're emotionally activated, we really can't perceive subtle energy. It just becomes impossible, so we become unreliable. And learning to know that about ourselves, I think, is a really key and important part of becoming someone who is reliable, who can trust the information they're getting from spirit. So when it comes to having a profound soul connection with someone, what I would offer is that it's information that has nothing to do with any kind of meant to be in the future. It's just telling you that you appreciate it. It's like having a type where you're like, I love tall, dark, and handsome, or I love dimples, or, the really good shoulders do it for me, or I love bright blue eyes. Whatever it is, we have our physical type. And yes, if you're energetically sensitive, you're probably way more compelled by your energetic type than you are by any particular physical characteristics. People are just moved by different chakras. For me, a crown chakra connection is so interesting, whereas someone else might be really influenced by the fact that someone was financially resourced. Oh wow, he's a doctor, high status, biggest and strongest, and have a real genuine excitement and affinity for someone who had professional success. Whereas, for me, if it lights up on the soul level and there's a heart connection and there's sexual chemistry, that will really move me to the point that I can ignore really important differences that make it unsustainable. And I have spent so much time in my life in the ecstasy and misery of trying to make it work with someone where there was a profound connection, but who wasn't lined up and wasn't suitable to be a good partner. And some of it was internal healing, but a lot of it was poor choosing on my part, where I tried to work with issues that without the soul connection, I never thought it would have been a good idea to try to make it work with someone who was in that deep with alcohol, for example. So the good news is that the mythology of there only being the one soulmate or the one twin flame, I have found to be absolutely untrue. I'm an older soul. I've been around the block a bunch of times. A lot of my clients have as well. And when you keep yourself available, you'll find that it's not like every third person you have this affinity for, but there are actually a lot of us incarnate right now. So the odds of meeting multiple people with whom you have affinity from another lifetime and a similar soul note harmony and different archetypes, like there's a lot of amazing old souls coming to the earth with a transpersonal intention to participate in humanity's destiny paths being something beautiful and kind and needs met for the planet and the animals and the trees and each other and all the different permutations. It's a powerful time. And so the mythology that there's only one of these things because you've experienced your first one, it's understandable. It's understandable if you've never felt this with anyone else, why you would feel like you would never again feel it. But I can say from experience, having believed that when it first popped up and having experienced something different when I learned not to attach and dig in and put myself heart and soul into something that wasn't very sustainable, that, oh wow, there are lots of people I have varying degrees of affinity. And I've also learned that that affinity can tell me about history. It doesn't tell me meant to be future. We're on the planet of free choice, and if a soul that you thought you were going to get together with and do something doesn't choose you, from a soul perspective, it's like, oh, okay, cool, you changed your mind. I'm infinitely resourceful. Let me magnetize in another soul that would love to experience the thing with me. It's a little more complicated at the human level because of all of the emotions and experiences and being fixed in space and time and the ways that our mind isn't really set up to map reality, and our instincts that tell us there's a scarcity of humans, and so the humans that are in potential form because we haven't met them don't even register as a possibility. So there's a lot that goes into this. But what I'd like to offer here is, if you're having a soul affinity for someone and it's not working as a relationship, I'm not going to tell you the soul affinity isn't real. It is real, it's potent, it's vivid, it's amazing when you come across it, and for most of us it's incredibly high value. We really, really, really treasure meeting someone on that level. And there's so much pain that goes with valuing that above valuing everything else the other chakras need, valuing being treated with respect, having someone meet you in ways that would authentically work for you in relationship. And those 1 foot in, 1 foot out, this doesn't work, but I can't give it up. Those have been some of the most painful, unpleasant times in my life. And it's really eroded my sense of self when I was trapped in that cycle, because I knew it wasn't good for me, but I couldn't give it up. And so not only was I at times angry with the other person who just wouldn't show up in the way that I really wanted them to, I had a lot of self-anger because I couldn't step away, and a lot of self-frustration of being so trapped and being so engaged. And one of the things that I learned in this period of time where I was so caught up in making this work one way or another, and I'm an immensely creative and resourceful person, so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out a way to make this go forward as something that was fundamentally not aligned and not sustainable. Didn't work in the long run, but I certainly gave it a really, really good try. Is that one of the ways I most shot myself in the foot when I was ready to step away was all the time I spent creating a mental construct around the relationship. So for one of them, he was in the Navy, so he was deployed at times, and the deployment wasn't the problem in the relationship. The drinking and other behaviors had a lot more to do with it. His fundamental ambivalence about being in a committed relationship factored in heavily, as well as a bunch of other sort of just personality types. We tended to be super intense together and move more toward drama than away from drama. You know, it wasn't a real way that we exactly brought out the most mature, healthy, collaborative parts of each other. And I absolutely, positively had my part in it. But I spent a lot of time longing for him and daydreaming for him and running the archetypical energies that danced between us and fantasizing about him and sort of turning those feelings on inside of myself when he wasn't there, because, you know, there was this amazing emotionality that I felt about him. And it just created a really huge energetic construct that when I was ready to choose again, when I'd run that chapter out, when I'd exhausted the emotional bank account, when I was just tired and kind of bored and truly ready to be complete, which admittedly took a lot of emotional roller coasters and ups and downs, but I did eventually get there. I had all these neural pathways about thinking about him. So I literally had to activate neuroplasticity in my brain, and I had to dismantle all these energetic constructs that I'd created about running my energy in certain ways, not even related to him, just related to my own thoughts and feelings and fantasies. And that was a really big pain to take down. And so one of the takeaways that I had is, even when I'm really excited about someone new, I'll give myself a little bit of time to be with it and to smile and get wiggle butt, as my sister calls it. But then I very firmly bring my awareness back into the here and now, because if I need to pivot, I'll be a lot more sober and sane and clear and less likely to lie to myself. And if I do have to step away, the duration of the time of being really sad and arguing with reality that this didn't work out is going to be massively shorter if I don't do that. So regardless, I just want to invite you, like the consider taking twin flame and soulmate out of your vocabulary. They don't really illuminate anything. People define them a ton of different ways, and see if you can find language that is unique to you, that delineates and differentiates and maps the amazing energetic experience that you're having. I think that that's a real component, and it's very rich and it's very important, but I think you'll get so much more out of it if you do the work of putting your own words to it. And it won't become a placeholder where you're putting yourself on the vibe of all the people who are really, really hooked in because of a soul affinity for someone who's a bad match, who's really, really a terrible human partner for them, and all the pain and suffering of being so compelled at an energetic soul level, perhaps sexual level, and yet so unhappy because you're being treated in a way that isn't okay with you. You really don't want to join that particular collective vibe, so not using the language that is being used for people who are justifying staying at that level is really helpful. Truth of it is, you're not done until you're done. So if you do have a soul connection with someone and it isn't working and you're not at a place where you're able to leave, that's okay. But if you're looking it straight in the eye and not rationalizing, but just saying, this doesn't really make sense. It's a difficult place. This isn't working well. I don't see a good destiny path for a future, but some part of me is clinging really, really hard, and I haven't figured out how to pry that part of me's fingers off of this dynamic so that I can authentically come home to myself. That's a really valid thing to say. But if you put aside those terms that have so much meaning for how the story is supposed to come out, you won't be creating a mythology that just because there's this profound energetic connection, it makes it a viable relationship. And I think that that's such an important and necessary distinction, because we don't learn about this stuff. We grow up getting a lot of messages that, this feelings and those experiences that you have. Like, I would say that my energetic senses are as vivid to me as my sense of hearing or touch. It's different, but it's a sense just like those. However, it's much less reliable because I have much less validation and training, because a lot of other people aren't hearing the same thing. Like, our circuitry for experiencing it is really different. So as a child, when I heard a sound and I responded, everybody else heard the same sound and responded and could give me context and could help me have meaning for how this worked. But for those of us who are energetically sensitive, we're a little bit in the minority. I think everyone has a capacity to sense energy, but for a lot of people it has to be a lot louder. If you have a really mentally ill person, the point at which other people are backing away may be long before they do anything objectively weird. They may just, it doesn't feel right. I think we have acute ability to sense, but for most people that isn't turned on. So when you come up against this intense, powerful, dynamic experience of meeting someone with whom you have a profound soul connection, you don't have the same maps. If you are trying to date an alcoholic, there's some really good maps. You can go to Al-Anon and you can, have a community of people who are in the same boat. There's a lot of collective wisdom for you that is available, whereas I don't think that there's the same support for navigating this profound energetic connection with someone who's a bad life partner. And the people who are talking about it the most are sharing their rationalizations, probably because they want their own dynamic to come right. And it doesn't mean there aren't people out there who are saying, this person can have a connection and be a bad life partner, and here's how you deal with it. But there's a lot of content being created by people who are trying to justify and create a story and a framework for how something that, if you looked at it logically and rationally, if you lined up a bunch of your best friends and said, is this a good place for you to be, are going to go like, yeah, no, I don't like how this person treats you. I don't like what you're experiencing. You've had a lot of late nights on the phone with me blown up because of what's happening. I don't want that for you. And yet that part can be so compelling. So I hope that this is a piece of information, not to say that it isn't complicated. Relationship choices are complicated, but I'm hoping that it will give you some hesitance about assigning a label that doesn't really mean anything, that tends to create a lot more story around a dynamic that gets in the way of you being able to map where would support you most to move, what would be the kindest and most holistic. And I want to emphasize that once I stopped automatically going deep with someone with whom I had this soul connection, with whom there was this profound experience, there are lots of different flavors of it, and instead really, really, really paid attention to the human alignment and stepped away when that wasn't there, I met a lot more people in a lot shorter time frame with whom I shared a lot more energetic affinity, a lot more dynamic nature to share it. And so I'm offering that that's always going to be really important to you as an energetically engaged person. How do our crown chakras dance? How do those move together? Absolutely valid thing to pay attention to. The invitation, though, is not to put the meaning on it that makes it so much more important than every other aspect of relationship that would relate to your quality of life, and not to feel like there's some mythical universal reason that you have to choose this because of this affinity. So again, it's complicated, but I'm hoping that having this framework, even if you're in it now and even if you go down some of these pathways, that perhaps it'll save you doing so repeatedly, because I spent a lot of time in this territory and it hurt. And I would love to help give people a good framework for understanding these experiences that is supportive for being able to choose a really supportive, kind, life-affirming approach when this complicated, crazy dynamic does show up. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.